Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Architecting Your Customer Success. My name is Stephen Hastert, and I will be your host today. We have two great speakers lined up for you, David Lopez, the Senior Director of Design and Customer Innovation at ServiceSource, and Mark Erbele, Global Customer Success Executive at ServiceSource. They will be discussing the importance of customer success planning and how you can create plans that work within your own business to improve customer satisfaction, increase retention rates, and maximize your revenue. Before we begin, I have a few details about today's webinar to cover. First, you are all in listen-only mode, but you can adjust the speaker volume to fit your own preferences. Following the presentation, we have reserved some time for your questions. So please, if you have those, submit those on the right side of the screen, and we will get to those following the presentation. If you miss any portion of today's webinar, don't worry. We will be sending you a recording in the next few days. So thanks for your time, and here's our customer success expert, David Lopez.
So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. To start with, I'd like to just thank you all for your time. I appreciate that it's a very precious resource. Over the next 30 to 45 minutes or so, we'll be discussing how you architect for customer success. I'm joined today by Mark Erbele, who has over 20 years experience in managing successful customer relationships and is a global customer success executive here at ServiceSource. My name is David Lopez, and I head up our customer design team. We're going to spend most of today's session discussing customer success plans. It's a method that we use to architect the most appropriate experience and to deliver that customer success. But before we get into that detail, I'd just like to set a little context. Customers' expectations have never been higher. As individuals, we've all seen the fantastic changes and digitally and otherwise that have happened, or those changes that have happened in a B2C space. And unsurprisingly, we're expecting that same level of engagement when we deal with other companies. We're expecting those in a B2B space as well. We expect those companies to know me, to know my business, to deliver consistently, to tailor their experiences to me, be proactive and responsive, to adapt and improve to me as I share more information with you, and to communicate efficiently. And this is coupled with an ever-increasing range and reach of the subscription economy in the B2B world. It's never been easier to switch providers if your current vendor isn't meeting what you need. Now, historically, organizations have answered this call to customer success or customer experience through customer service. They've done it in a reactive way based upon a call from the customer for a particular level of service. And larger customers or larger organizations might have had a white touch organization to do that in a more reactive or more active way rather. But increasingly, B2B organizations or those with a strong subscription element have pivoted towards a more active engagement called customer success. And it's probably just worth taking a moment or two to explain what we mean by customer success. For me, customer success is the most critical part of any B2B customer journey experience. But its process, or rather its purpose, is actually rather simple. Sorry, I've just had a note saying my audio is a bit sketchy. I've just moved the mic. Hopefully that's a bit better. Its purpose is actually really rather simple. You need to engage with your customer in a way that delivers value for both parties, both for them and for you, in a way that they trust you and maintain that loyalty of relationship with you. And that means that expectations, both explicit and implicit, have got to be set correctly in a way that both parties are seeing the value they expect from the solution, product, or service. They should be getting the gains they expect, whilst you are active in minimizing the pains they're experiencing. In addition to this, every customer is unique. Every customer has their own particular set of circumstances, and indeed, even different folks, different stakeholders within the organization still have different needs that you need to adapt and to manage for. That means that you need the right amount of information from the right individuals in order to deliver on those needs and deliver on those expectations. It means that you need to understand the value that you're bringing to them and have an experience that marries that value back to them. For some people, that will be a strict return on investment type calculation. But for others, it might be a wider piece in terms of the gains they're experiencing from your service into their organizations. But if you don't do this, the outcome is actually really rather obvious. Your customers will leave. And so some slower, some quicker, some might tell you why they're going, but probably most of them won't. And so a customer success plan is a great way of making sure that expectations are set appropriately on both sides so that you can deliver that great customer experience for your customers. It's based upon a mutual understanding between you and the customer. It sets a clear statement of value that they sign up to as well as yourselves that brings that customer journey experience. And it enables you to have a strategy rather than just tactics to manage that. So with that, I'd like to introduce, turn it over to Mark. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning, David.
So Mark, when you or your team go about constructing a plan, what are the key parts?
Yeah, first, David, I wanted to thank the audience for spending time with us today to talk through such a critical topic in our business climate. So there are several practical applications of building a customer success plan. They all tie back to alignment, communication, and measurement. They also unify a number of organizations or all organizations within a company around the most critical cause, their customers. Given ServiceSource's and our experience and our core competency around software license renewals, I've actually gotten a unique perspective of this on a daily basis. So too often in our business, we start a license renewal process for our clients only to find out that a customer has a 10% deployment rate versus their total purchase. That is not a winning proposition for any organization involved, especially when many times these are occurring after 9, 18, 21, 24 months. Customers have spent a lot of money without getting the return. So in this instance, companies aren't really aligned with their customers on the desired outcomes, and they are certainly not driving the customers to achieve maximum value. And the real shame here is that often the implementation team may have done a stellar job. They've achieved all the criteria for a successful launch, setting the stage for a successful relationship. But because a cross-functional success plan was not in place, gaps in the value equation were not identified, and that customer is now in safe play. In today's world too, David, customers don't need to wait to run down their annual subscription before leaving. In many instances, they can actually leave in the blink of an eye. And so to avoid this, we leverage our success plans for verifying that expectations are being addressed, communicating priorities and evaluation criteria, aligning with customers on the definition of success, scoring customer success metrics, and addressing potential exception. And we'll get into that a little bit later. Using a different example than the above, we all know that there are broader challenges faced with customers coming into a new vendor relationship. All experience that. This is where it can be really the wild west of customer expectations. Fortunately, I do find, though, that majority of those customers do have straightforward expectations. They're either looking for a product to be operational within a certain period of time, looking to gain a certain number of active users, or looking to have generated a specific ROI for the company and the return. Most of the time, it's actually all three, right? So a well-defined customer experience plan will outline all of these, and they will explicitly call out the tasks and deliverables that will help you meet those. It will be prescriptive as well. Even today, David, in managing ServiceSource's largest accounts, I frequently utilize and with every customer success plans. I've been managing the same customers for 3 to 4 years, and I've been able to tailor those to the key learnings that I've had over the past 3 to 4 years in managing these customers to ensure I don't miss a beat. So most importantly, think of a plan as a roadmap to value and something to measure against. Many organizations, though, struggle with this and cannot get their collective team wrapped around the time and resources required to develop and execute a customer success plan. They view it as an extra cost, an extra headcount, or extra effort. And the reality here is the old adage applies, right? We all know that it's 5, sometimes 25 times more expensive to go out and get a new customer to replace an old one. And so when we think about customer success planning and the investment needed and required for customer success, our organizations need to pivot their thinking that customers need to make and drive the investment into the customer success plan process. They need to ask themselves the question, can you really afford high churn rates? Because when you don't have that success plan, that's what's going to happen because you're not delivering a great customer experience. So David, by embracing success planning, you're actually streamlining your efforts to save resources, creating more time for proactive customer interaction, typically leads to more sales, reducing reactive scrambling when something goes wrong, which we're all dealing with on a daily basis, and feeling that longer-term revenue growth.
Thanks, Mark. Well, with that, I think we understand the benefits of a plan. I'd like to turn it over to our first poll, and I'd like to ask the audience, how many of you actually have a customer success plan in place today? And so we've got a couple of options there. Yes, we do have a plan in place, and they have quite a bit. No, we don't have the resources or capabilities to create, execute, or track such a plan. Or the middle option, yes, we do have a plan, but we're not sure as if we're using them to our full potential. So with that, I'd like to open the first poll.
So to submit your answer, please just click the graph icon on the right, and you'll see 3 options.
Give people a couple of seconds just to answer. Okay, so the options are in. About a third of people said that they had a plan and that they helped quite a bit. That's fantastic. Hopefully today we're going to hear some of the tips and hints and tips that might be able to augment that plan. About 43% said we don't have the resources to create or execute a plan, which is interesting. And about a third said we do have a plan today, but we're not utilizing them to their full potential. So, Mark, you've spoken about the importance of a plan. What are the steps that you put in place? How should an organization start in delivering and creating such a plan? What preparation do they need to do?
Yeah, thanks, David. So we put together a framework to help get everybody started. An effective customer experience plan will include the following elements, which I'll get to in more detail in a moment, right? Identify expectations, map processes, define metrics and goals, establishing a schedule, and then assigning responsibilities.
Well, I guess we start at the beginning, Mark.
How
should an organization identify those expectations and map those processes?
Look, likely most everybody on this call wants to go above and beyond for your customer, right? If you're focusing your time and energy on the wrong areas, though, David, you won't be appreciated or rewarded, and then they're not going to keep you around for very long. That's just the reality of the situation in this immediate gratification environment. So in order to be successful, the first thing we need to do is we need to get real with our customer and have honest conversation and find out what's most important to them, what's not important. I think of it as an active listening post, phrase one of my previous clients gave to me, right? So in many scenarios, David, companies' sales teams should have a process to hand off a lot of these key expectations as part of their sales process, right? Realistically speaking, though, a lot of the times those are coming from a sales lens, and the reality is many are incomplete, partial, and sometimes not handed off at all, right? So even if the sales organization has a list of customer expectations that they've done through the sales process, it is going to be critical for the delivery team, the customer success organization, to revalidate all of those with the appropriate delivery and execution lenses. And that's going to ensure total alignment with the customer out of the gate. And the only way you can really give your best to the customer is to truly understand them, right? And that's candidly on a personal and professional basis, but you got to ask as many questions as you can. And candidly, make sure you're documenting all of these. Many times, it's the nuance of the way you listen to your customers to understand the pain points that makes you successful, right? So as you've asked as many questions as you can, you want to make sure you document and share those relevant records with the customer. And realistically speaking, this is not just about setting up net new customers. As we're going through and managing relationships over the course of years, we need to spend time revalidating those questions to ensure that we understand how things have changed, right? So when you're launching with customers, having these conversations early on, they help you build rapport, build relationships, and help you understand their needs and manage expectations. It also gives you, as the person, kind of the primary stakeholder, the opportunity to get internal cross-functional alignment, which is so critical, on what success looks like much early in the upstream of the process, right? Typically speaking, with most people on this webinar, I'm assuming we have very complex relationships with our customers, right? A lot of services, a lot of technology, a lot of data type customers on this call. And it's really critical for us to understand that as early as possible. So David, when we actually start some of this understanding and identifying expectations, we're doing that earlier in the sales cycle, even prior to signature. And so that helps us hit the ground running from a delivery perspective. And then as we pivot from identifying expectations into mapping the process to meet expectations, the reality is a majority of your customers' expectations will be addressed by your standard onboarding, adoption, and delivery procedures, right? I think most of the time, the 80-20 model that we all know and love applies here. Depending on the industry, depending on maturity curve of your company and your customers, it could actually be the 50-50 model, right? And so there's some variability in here. Fortunately, most of the companies out there aren't offering custom and bespoke solutions to their customer base. And so that makes it much easier for us to leverage our key learnings when we map these processes to meet the expectation. I'll get into expectations or exceptions a little bit later. Actually, we can talk about it now. The 20%, right, as we think about exceptions, those cost more time, more money to implement because they're out of the norm, right? They're non-standard, and we have to spend time understanding them in order to define a solution, right? These are also the places where we need to have better accountability across the board, starting with the customer success manager and throughout the teams that help deliver a successful customer proposition. Simple exception would be your customer signed on to your service to exceed their revenue goals, right? It's some type of service or analytical process to drive revenue. So they're trying to drive the revenue. The reality is they've got a quarterly target, but they didn't sign up until later in the quarter. And so in order for them to meet their needs much earlier than you would typically drive the ROI or the business case, you're going to have to spend more time and effort onboarding them and driving them to their success earlier on. And so understanding timeline, understanding ROI, understanding business case, understanding what's critical to the customer is so important to get that out of the way straight away so you can identify these exceptions and put the non-standard plans in place to address them.
So we start by understanding the customer. We map those processes as are important to them based upon their business needs. Are they onboarding at the end of the quarter, at the start of the quarter? What are their pieces to value? That's how we begin the process. But where do you go next? How do you understand the metrics and the goals that are important for them?
I mean, the reality is, and most companies understand this today, right? If you can't measure what you're doing, you it gets really, really tough to provide the value to your customer, right? Or to prove the value to your customer. And it's a little bit easier to get away with that if you are in a good time. But if there's competition, if there's new stakeholders, if there's a business change that's out of your control, and that good time turns into a bad time, the reality is they're always going to question whether or not the investment is worth it. And to be able to have a rock solid metric that you can measure to prove that value is absolutely critical, right? You know, stakeholder engagement and having the right executive sponsor is going to get you far in a lot of relationships. But no matter how much that stakeholder will carry the water for you as a company, if you don't have that empirical evidence to show how critical you are to the success of your customer's organization, you're putting a lot of risk in that relationship, right? So what's critical is to work to identify those right goals and metrics for each customer relationship. Again, 80-20 is likely going to apply in this situation. What's most important also is that you're working with your customer to actually define these, and you've documented them and agreed to them, right? I've seen, fairly frequently, I've seen a situation where, as a customer success manager, you think you hear something, and so you assume that's what the metric is. And then, unfortunately, there's a lot of nuance to active listening. And unfortunately, a lot of times, what you think you heard wasn't exactly what the customer meant, right? And so getting those documented, getting them measured, and getting them tied to a metric is going to be critical, right? And it's always nice if you can under-promise and over.
So under-promise, over-perform, make sure your goals are aligned well to your stakeholders and that those goals and metrics are easily visible and so that you can show your value. Map the processes, make sure you understand where they are, their thought processes, their expectations, and then marry those through back to the metrics. So I guess that measurement of realistic goals is really critical. But what's the next stage? How do you put that into practice?
Well, look, frequently, right, as you onboard, adopt, and you drive expansion and renew customers, and you have a customer success plan, it's a cross-functional plan, right? It's across organizations, and you're going to have different stakeholders touching that customer, whether it be through multi-level coverage or whether it be through different organizations who have different responsibilities. So in my opinion, the most important thing is assigning responsibility, right? And there needs to be owners to maximize the efficiency and effectiveness of what the success plan looks like. Everybody on the team needs to know what each other's responsibilities are, what they're doing, and how you actually fit within the team or the organization that's supporting that customer and supporting that success plan, right? Customer relationships are our most important asset and most critical to every company's success. And so when you think about assigning responsibility, you need to make sure it's within the right organization and the right resource. Now, once you've got those responsibilities assigned, David, schedule, right? I mean, everything needs a timeline in order to ensure we're on track, in order to ensure we're aligned with not only what we need to deliver, but we're aligned with the expectation of the customer, right? So the schedule needs to be realistic, and that should come out in places where we've been establishing expectations with the customers and trying to balance expectations with customers with realistic delivery deadlines. So if we can get that right and assign the responsibilities and tie that together with appropriate schedules and get that internally aligned as well as aligned externally with the customers, then you've got a great plan to work against that's going to drive towards what the outcomes are meant to be for the customer.
So figure out what they need, the way in which they need it. Make sure you're delivering against that. Make sure that that's measurable in terms of the metrics that you're providing, and that the goals are easily or obtainable. I think your words were under promise and over deliver. And then establish a rhythm, a schedule to make sure that those are all defined along with roles and responsibilities both internally and externally in terms of what we need to do. That's quite a lot there, Mark. Have you got anything, I don't like to call them shortcuts, but tips that you would use to help an organization on their way, to help them get going?
I do, and I just actually looked to make sure none of my clients were on this webinar because I didn't want to be talking about under-promising with them on the call. Yeah, look, I think there's a handful of tips that we can think about when putting plans into action as we think about customer success plans, right? The first of which is templates, right? So even if it's 50-50, right, and you have 50% consistency in expectations and requirements and those things, and 50% bespoke or snowflake type solution, like we need to think about how we take that 50% and standardize it, right? So as we gain more and more experience with customer success plans, we can build these templates that are going to reduce the time and effort it takes to get a new customer up and going. It also helps us drive best practices into action and really learn from our previous mistakes, right? So this is going to be an iterative process, and there is some learning involved in it. So it's critical to have a template, know what's worked in the past, continue to refine that template as you move forward, right? And so, okay, where does that template go? Technology is critical in enabling customer success plans. And what's most critical about technology is really trying to get to a place where you have a 360-degree view of a customer, right? Collecting and maintaining all of the data and information tied to every single touch point that you have with your customer. Now, different companies and different industries are at different places to be able to do that, right? You know, the latest software and applications will have usage data that we can know and understand what a customer is doing and what keyboard, you know, what letter they're clicking on the keypad almost, or keyboard. And then with some other industries and some legacy applications, right, it's very difficult to come across usage data. And so in places like that, getting proxies for usage data is critical. But trying to get that 360 view is absolutely critical for success, right? And this technology platform will help you scale, drive efficiencies, and move forward in an effective manner with your success plans. And within that technology platform, David, those metrics, those goals, those responsibilities, and those schedules should be consolidated and integrated, right? And so you have all of this information together in one centralized place to make proactive recommendations, and eventually you get to the place where you're stopping problems before they even start, right? You're predictive, right? You're ahead of the curve. This helps in so many different ways, from a communication perspective, from an ROI perspective, going back to the tangibility of results and making sure you're supporting your executive stakeholder. All of these are beneficial with the technology. Third piece is just measuring, right? Measuring through frictionless means. You know, all of, and I kind of covered off on this a little bit with a robust technology platform, right? But metrics, KPIs, balanced scorecards, all tied together. You should be able to understand through, you know, your typical land, adopt, expand, renew type motion, right? The customer kind of life cycle motion. You should have a framework of measures in each of those phases that you can start off with most customers, right? In order to measure success. And lastly, communication. And this is where so much of this falls down. It's communication across organizations internally, and then it's also communications with the customers, right? So not only do you need recurring calls with your customers to communicate the progress and how you're tracking against the plan, you need to make sure you have those calls internally, right? There's not a standard communication cadence that should happen for every single customer. That's part of the customization, right? But you must have the appropriate periodic reviews to obtain feedback. It could be a different channel, certain channels like email, quarterly business reviews. I engage with my customers via text message quite a bit because I've built that trust in the relationship with them. But my success plan enables me to use a lot of different tools to drive the right communication to the customers in order to get better and in order to drive the value that we signed up to.
Brilliant. I think those are really great tips. And so, Mark, we've just spent the last 25 minutes or so talking about customer success plans, talking about some of their key elements. And so with that, I'd like to open up to our last poll of the day, which is actually those people listening today, do you think, given everything we've spoken about customer success plans, about how they increase our understanding of the customer, how they help us measure what's important to them, how they engage through a different structure and the rhythm and the communication that Mark spoke of, do you think that your customer engagement could be improved by creating and executing on a customer success plan? And so, Steve, I wonder if you could open the poll, and we've got two choices there. Yes, I think it could, or no, I don't think they're worth it. Give people just a few seconds to vote. Okay, let's end that poll. Mark, well, it looks like you've convinced them. 92% of the audience say that actually a customer success plan is a great idea. So that's fantastic news. And just to reiterate some of the points that Mark touched on, he spoke about the criticality of identifying expectations, to making sure that that you're really sure, really confident in what's important for your customer. What are they seeking to get out of the purchase of your product or service? What are the pains that they're experiencing, both regardless of where they are in their life cycle? And the next, he spoke about how you map that process, making sure that you're delivering what your customers want, where they want it. And then he spoke about metrics and goals and how it's important to measure robustly, to measure repeatedly, and have goals that are deliverable, but that actually meet back to the expectations that your customer had. Then he spoke about scheduling, and actually one of the tips around communication and frequency of communication, and how you need to assign responsibility, make sure that that responsibility is clear on both parties, and so that you can see the customer, see their data, understand what they're going through, have the right people in place to make those interventions when they need to a defined schedule, and also actively throughout the engagement. So with that, that's really all we have time for today. We'd love to learn more about your customer journey experience and how you manage customer success. And so for that, we have a brief survey online right now. We're going to send out a link to this survey after the webinar. You can take it. It'll be open for the next week or so, and when you enter to complete the survey, you'll be entered into a prize draw for winning a $100 Amazon gift card. So Mark spoke about the importance of planning and executing your customer success plan, making sure that you engage and add value to your customer at each interaction, delivering on the most appropriate experience for them and for you. And customer success really covers the complete life cycle of customer engagement, as do the services that we here at ServiceSource provide, from sales development through to customer acquisition, through to renewals via account management and partner success. All of this is underpinned by industry-leading technology to provide that 360 view that Mark spoke about, and it's delivered by skilled staff in industry-leading centers across the globe. If you'd like to hear more about these, please don't hesitate to contact us at the end of the webinar via the links provided. And with that, I'd like to thank Mark and for you all for your time. And Steve, I'd like to turn it back to you to see if we have any questions.
Yes, you guys aren't off the hook yet. We do have several questions from our attendees today. The first one is, what if your product is designed for sporadic or periodic use? For example, heavy use for 2 weeks and then 4 months of inaction. How would you alter a customer success plan to fit this type of a model?
I think there's I have a couple thoughts around that, right? So first, you should be able to identify those expectations right early on with the customer and understand what their requirements and needs are. Okay, so that's not going to be a surprise to you. I think in a scenario like that as well, you can nail the communication piece as you set expectations with the customers, right? If they're taking 4 months of inaction, then you're not communicating with them monthly. You're setting a cadence that's appropriate for the service that's being delivered and the time of the service that you're being delivered. You want to make sure you have communications, right before, right during, and right after that heavy months, those heavy weeks of use, and that's where you should focus on that. Usage data is going to change how you operate as well. If you have usage data to understand the patterns of those heavy use, then you are in a bit better of a spot. If you don't have usage data, then you probably need to build some communication plans and engagement strategies to ensure you understand the calendar of events of when the customer is going to use that, right? So candidly, this is one of those, it's all around getting the right expectations with the customer and then aligning the way you're delivering your plan to those expectations. More so than having a significantly altered plan that doesn't follow a lot of the framework that we talked about today. David, would you add anything to that?
I think that's great. I think that comes back to those processes and also around the communication. So if the engagement is very bursty, you need to make sure that your processes are robust enough to cope with that very high demand of whatever the product or service is at that peak time. And you typically see that in a retail environment or otherwise, where you have those rapid ramp periods. The other point that I think probably, Mark, I'd like to make is around that communication. If your product or service is being used very heavily, it's likely that the individuals, your senior stakeholders, are going to have other concerns. And so you need to change the rhythm of your communication and the expectations of those communications to cut them additional slack around those times, alongside making sure that you're still delivering on that value to your customer.
Great. I have another one here for you. So if you're starting in fresh and you've never made a customer success plan, what do you think is the most difficult part just to get started, and what are your recommendations to overcome that hurdle?
So,
Mark, I'll let you start that one.
Yeah, no, the difficulty, and I'm going to take a little bit of a different lens, which is, hey, what's the most difficult piece of creating a customer success plan with a new customer? And in reality, my feel around that is, generally speaking, it comes back to the communication again, right? Starting to understand the way customers communicate, what their words actually mean, and being able to interpret the nuances of those to set an appropriate customer success plan is challenging, right? Because you're working in the same industry, you're managing a lot of different customers. There's a lot of different ways for people to actually voice what they mean, right? And so you need to kind of wade through that noise to try to really get aligned on what the customer is truly saying and what they truly need, which goes back to why it's so critical to document and align in written form what you think you're hearing back to the customer, and making sure you're aligned on those things before you move into like the metric definition and measure phase, right? So now there are other things like these are going to be dependent upon the situation again, right? How much data do you use? Do you have available to you? What type of analytics can you use on that data? The less you have, the harder it's going to be. And the more thought needs to be put in, well, how can we try to measure success, right? David, what would you add to that?
I think that's fair. I would say that great is the enemy of good here. Start small, start nimble, and probably focus on those ones in the middle, most crucially, in terms of defining metrics and how you qualify the goals. And then the rest of the processes, I'm sure your organization probably already has steps in place. But just start and be agile to the plan based upon what your customers are feeding back.
Okay, and I think we have time for one last question today, and that is, do do you alter your customer success plans by geography?
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly the same thing.
Look, sorry, realistically speaking, right? I think you alter your go-to-market strategy around sales, around execution, around operations. If you're talking about, geographies at the macro level, like the Americas, EMEA, and APJ, and even within places like EMEA, right? Northern EMEA, Scandinavian countries operate way differently than the Middle East countries do. And so you have to understand the nuances of the geography. You have to understand how people communicate, how people want to work together. A lot of this is a soft skill component to it, right? The data should be similar coming out of the system, whether it's in Saudi Arabia or Norway, right? It's all around the soft skills of how you communicate, when you communicate, the frequency, the communication channels. And as you think about building out these plans, those are the nuance where you really want to have some local knowledge of what's going to work best. And then realistically speaking, as you get these built out, you have to go one step deeper because every customer has their own nuances, even if you have the nuances of a geography, right?
I think that's absolutely right. Putting my service design hat, I would say that different customers have different things that they associate value with. And that's going to vary depending upon the stakeholder within the organization. It's going to vary upon their history with you, and it's going to vary upon geography. And I think Mark's first step, understand what's important, is just super critical, because without that first step, you're never going to be able to deliver a service that meets those expectations.
Okay, with that, I'd like to thank David and Mark for all your information today. And most importantly, I'd like to thank everybody for your time and attending. Keep an eye out for that email on the survey. You should be seeing that very shortly. And if you are interested in learning more, we have another webinar at ServiceSource on September 25th, where we'll be addressing the B2B sales economy and how inside sales impacts that. So thank you, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you.